It was September 19th, 1991, when two hikers trudging through melting ice in the Ötztal Alps on the Austrian-Italian border stumbled on what looked like a recent mountain casualty. A body lay partially protruding from the glacier, but as they began to dig, it became clear this wasn't recent at all. They had unearthed a perfectly preserved human who had been frozen in time for over 5,000 years. We now know him as Ötzi the Iceman, named for the Ötztal Alps, where he lay hidden for millennia. The moment sparked global fascination. Once excavation began, researchers understood instantly. This man was ancient. Subsequent radiocarbon dating confirmed he died around c. 3300 BCE, making him older than both Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids of Giza. Ötzi was around 45 years old, stood about 160 n, so 5 tak 3 hours, and bore dozens of tattoos etched deep into his skin. Analysis of his last meal revealed ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and traces of fern, possibly used either medicinally or as food wrapping. DNA testing placed him in the mtDNA haplogroup K10, with roots traceable to regions like Sardinia and the Caucasus, suggesting he belonged to a Neolithic migration wave across Europe. But what really captivated researchers was his gear, a snapshot of Copper Age ingenuity: deerskin shoes insulated with grass netting, a goatskin coat, leggings, a sheepskin loincloth, and even an unfinished long bow taller than he was. His copper axe, a symbol of status, was surprisingly advanced for its time. He also carried a grass-sheath flint dagger, birch bark ember containers, and medicinal fungi strung on leather, likely used as both tinder and primitive antibiotics. All of this paints a portrait of a skilled woodsman and hunter, fully adapted to his rugged alpine environment. Despite his vitality, Ötzi's body showed signs of wear: lactose intolerance, Lyme disease, the oldest known case, arthritis in his neck, lower back, and right knee, and blackened lungs, likely from inhaling smoke over his lifetime. His nails recorded stress lines, and parasitic whipworm inhabited his intestines. Even as late as 2001, researchers found an arrowhead lodged in his left shoulder and pronounced it the cause of death, claiming it severed a major artery and caused fatal bleeding. For years, the narrative was consistent. Ötzi had been shot with an arrow, his wound punctured the subclavian artery, and he bled to death. Additional head injuries, depressions, and fractures in his skull suggested he might have been struck again, perhaps with a blunt object. The story was compelling: an ambush, a chase, a violent end. But science evolves. A recent forensic study, published by researchers from the University of Zurich in May 2025, used advanced 3D reconstruction and detailed CT scan analysis to reassess the arrow wound and skull trauma. This new research found that though the arrowhead did rupture tissue, the resulting internal bleeding was estimated to be roughly 110 mmol, about half a cup, not enough to cause rapid exsanguination. Even more compelling, the skull fractures appear more consistent with a fall, perhaps from rough alpine terrain, rather than intentional violence. The locations and shapes of the depressions align with injuries from slipping on rocky slopes while wearing rudimentary fur headgear, which might have cushioned the blow somewhat, but didn't prevent it. These findings dramatically alter the long-held homicide narrative. The arrow wound, while painful and debilitating, likely didn't kill him outright. The head trauma seems accidental. Instead, the new conclusion is both chilling and tragic. Ötzi most likely died from hypothermia, his body succumbing to the cold after being wounded and immobilized high in the Alps. In this scenario, Ötzi may have been injured, his arm useless, mobility limited, and possibly disoriented after a fall. Exposed to alpine weather conditions, unable to descend or find shelter, his core temperature would have dropped. As hypothermia set in, he would have become confused, lethargic, and eventually unconscious, dying over a period of minutes to hours. What does this shift in understanding mean? It doesn't rule out violence entirely. There are still signs pointing to interpersonal conflict. The arrow wound and stress injuries on his hands show he was likely in some kind of struggle. Pollen and isotopic studies of his tissues suggest Ötzi ranged across different altitudes, hinting at either nomadic movement or possibly fleeing conflict shortly before his death. But where previous theories claimed a swift, violent death, modern analysis offers a more nuanced, agonizing story. Injuries left him vulnerable, and nature delivered the final blow. The arrow and fall may have wounded him. The freezing alpine environment finished him off. This reinterpretation doesn't diminish Ötzi's significance. It enhances it. It shows us how forensic science, CT imaging, and 3D modeling can breathe new life into ancient mysteries. What began as a compelling murder story has now evolved into a layered narrative of injury, endurance, and environmental peril. Up to now, Ötzi's death has been portrayed as dramatic, an arrow in the back, perhaps a blow to the head. But the truth could be even more haunting, a slow, helpless decline into hypothermia, alone on a mountain pass. So now that we've laid out the shifting narrative, how Ötzi likely died not from a sudden blow, but from hypothermia, we can dive deeper into the clues his body left behind, clues that hint at the final chapter of his life and the days or even hours that led him to that frozen grave. Let's begin with something as simple, and yet as intimate, as what he ate. Ötzi's digestive tract, remarkably well preserved, provides a time capsule into his last meals. His stomach contents revealed that he had consumed a mix of ibex meat, einkorn wheat, and fern. The ibex meat, wild mountain goat, was fatty and rich in calories, the kind of energy source you'd want before attempting a demanding alpine ascent. Einkorn wheat was a staple grain of the time, and the ferns might have been eaten for medicinal reasons or simply used to wrap the meat. Either way, the food suggests preparation. This wasn't a man starving or caught unawares. He had provisions and survival know-how. But food wasn't the only thing he carried. His toolkit was astonishing in both variety and craftsmanship. Consider his copper axe, not only a cutting tool, but also a possible status symbol. Copper required smelting and technical knowledge, and not everyone had the means to own such a blade. He also had a flint knife with a finely crafted ashwood handle, a quiver with 14 arrows, only 2 of which were fully assembled with flint heads and feathers. The rest were partially made, suggesting he may have been in the process of preparing or replacing them. There was also his unfinished longbow, taller than himself, made of yew wood, one of the best materials for powerful bows even centuries later. And then there were birch bark containers, believed to have held embers wrapped in maple leaves. These would have been his version of portable fire starters, because when you're surviving in the mountains, fire is life, and still, it didn't save him. Ötzi's clothing is another marvel, both for its functionality and the insight it gives us into prehistoric textile knowledge. He wore leggings made of goat leather, a sheepskin loincloth, and a coat crafted from woven strips of goat and sheep hide. His shoes were made of bearskin and deerskin, filled with grass for insulation, and tied together with leather straps. His fur cap, lined with hide and stitched for durability, might have once shielded him from cold wind, but offered little defense against a rocky fall. All these items indicate a man who knew how to live and move through rugged terrain. He was a mountain traveler, likely accustomed to harsh climates and steep passes, and yet that experience couldn't protect him from what ultimately happened. It's a reminder that even the best preparation can fail when the elements turn against you. What about his health? You might imagine someone with his outdoor lifestyle would be in top shape, but Ötzi's body told another story. He suffered from arthritis, with signs of wear in his lower spine, right knee, and neck. He had lactose intolerance, which wasn't uncommon at the time, and had blackened lungs, probably from years of exposure to campfire smoke. Parasites were found in his intestines, including the eggs of whipworm, which would have caused digestive issues. And then there's the most extraordinary find, evidence of Lyme disease, the oldest known case in the world. That alone redefines what we know about the history of the disease. It means the pathogen existed and was affecting humans at least 5,000 years ago. His fingernails bore Bowes lines, which are horizontal ridges caused by stress or illness. These lines, along with other stress markers in his bones and hair, reveal that he suffered from at least 3 significant health episodes in the months before his death. He wasn't just battling the environment. His body was already under pressure. Taken together, all these factors create a vivid profile of a man who was rugged but not invincible. A traveler, but one who may have been fleeing or pursuing. Someone who knew survival, but perhaps found himself caught in a situation beyond his control. Now imagine the scene. He's injured, either from a hostile encounter or perhaps something more accidental. The arrow in his shoulder hinders his ability to climb or defend himself. He may have stumbled, fallen, hit his head. His survival gear is still with him, but without movement, even the best clothing and tools mean little in the freezing air. He's on a mountain pass, at elevation, the weather unpredictable. Winds whip through the peaks, and temperatures drop rapidly. Alone, wounded, and disoriented, Ötzi likely succumbed slowly to hypothermia. His core temperature dropping, his strength fading. His final hours would have been marked by confusion, exhaustion, and finally, unconsciousness. And here is the eerie twist. It is exactly that freezing death that preserved him so perfectly. Because he died in a narrow rock depression filled with glacial ice and snow, his body was shielded from the sun, animals, and bacteria. Layer upon layer of ice accumulated over him, turning his grave into a time capsule. When he was found 300 years later, everything, from his skin to his tools, remained intact. It's haunting to think. If he had died a few feet away on open rock instead of in a shaded ice gully, we might never have discovered him. We wouldn't know this Copper Age traveler's name, his tools, his DNA, or his final meal. The past would have remained silent. But instead, we got Ötzi. So what really happened to Ötzi? We know now that his death was likely not a quick execution in a tribal skirmish, but a slow and agonizing decline, part injury, part exposure, part mystery. But there are still unanswered questions that make Ötzi one of the most compelling figures in prehistoric archaeology. First, let's return to that arrow wound. Even though recent scans show the bleeding was minimal, it still raises a fundamental question. Why was he shot? This wasn't a hunting accident. The trajectory and angle suggest he was shot from behind, likely from a distance, while possibly walking away or trying to escape, and the arrow wasn't retrieved, a fact that suggests urgency or danger. Whoever shot him didn't have time to remove the shaft. That points to either a chase or fear of being seen. Also worth noting, the arrowhead was made from chert, a material that wasn't local to the area Ötzi died in. That suggests it came from another region, possibly indicating cross-tribal interactions, trade, or conflict. Could he have been tracked across valleys? Was he marked? Ötzi also bore injuries to his hands, including deep cuts between his thumb and forefinger. These wounds weren't from crafting or accidental tool use. They were more consistent with defensive injuries, as if he'd tried to ward off a blade or struggled with an attacker. Then there's the evidence from his gear. His dagger was still in its sheath. His bow was unfinished. The arrows were mostly incomplete. A man preparing for violence would have kept his weapons sharp and ready. This suggests either he was caught off guard, or he wasn't expecting conflict at all. And still, he had food in his belly, tools in his pack, and fire-starting gear at the ready. This wasn't someone who had been stripped or robbed. His valuable copper axe, one of the most prized possessions of the era, was still with him. In the ancient world, that was wealth, a kind of portable currency and symbol of status. If someone had wanted to rob him, that axe would be gone. So the motive for violence isn't clear-cut. If he was ambushed or attacked, it wasn't for resources. Maybe it was revenge, maybe something more personal, territorial, or ceremonial, or maybe the arrow was part of a warning, not meant to kill, but it led to Ötzi's slow, frozen end. Another angle to explore is his travel pattern in the days before he died. Scientists have analyzed pollen grains, isotopic signatures, and microscopic plant remains in his digestive system. This tells us not just what he ate, but where he had been. Ötzi moved rapidly across different altitudes in the final 72 hours of his life. He went from a valley rich in deciduous trees to mid-elevation conifer forests, and then ascended high into the alpine zone where he ultimately died. That's a vertical journey of hundreds of meters. No easy feat, especially with a shoulder wound. Why make such a trek? Some researchers suggest he was fleeing. Maybe he had angered a rival group or committed some transgression. Maybe he was banished and forced into the mountains. Another theory says he was performing a ritual or seeking solitude. Ancient societies often had ceremonial paths across mountains, pilgrimages, so to speak. But there's a darker possibility. Maybe he was being hunted. The travel speed, the wounds, the high-altitude isolation, it paints a picture of a man trying to escape something. Or someone. Now let's shift the lens from Ötzi the individual to Ötzi the cultural mirror. His remains dawn to just tell us about his personal story. They open a window into an entire prehistoric world. The Copper Age was a time of profound transition. Farming communities were expanding. Metalwork was becoming more sophisticated. Trade networks crisscrossed Europe. And with that growth came friction, competition for land, cultural clashes, and perhaps even the first seeds of organized conflict. Ötzi's death, violent, or at the very least under suspicious circumstances, may reflect that societal shift. We tend to think of prehistory as a quiet, simple time. But Ötzi suggests otherwise. His equipment, movement, and even injuries hint at tension, complexity, and possibly power dynamics among early alpine peoples. Even his tattoos, which number over 60, might not have been purely decorative or medicinal. Some believe they were ritualistic, possibly symbolic of tribal affiliation, shamanic roles, or rites of passage. If that's the case, then Ötzi may have been more than just a hunter. He could have been a leader, a healer, or a renegade. But the mystery goes even further. In 2019, researchers sequenced Ötzi's full genome, and the results were surprising. Despite living in the Alps, he had almost no genetic similarity to modern alpine populations. Instead, his closest relatives were in Sardinia, an island hundreds of kilometers away. This supports the idea that early European farmers migrated from the Mediterranean and settled inland over generations. So Ötzi wasn't just a mountain man. He was a descendant of pioneers, shaped by generations of movement, adaptation, and survival. His genetic footprint helps us understand how populations shifted in prehistoric Europe, who mixed, who stayed, and who moved on. All this adds depth to the tragedy. Ötzi wasn't some anonymous figure swept away by time. He was someone with a story. And through that story, we learn more about the human experience, how we migrate, how we clash, how we survive, and sometimes, how we fall. As more evidence emerged over the years, researchers realized that Ötzi's story wasn't a T just about his death. It was about how his life reflected the innovations, struggles, and human moments of an entire era. Let's take a moment to appreciate how technologically advanced he really was. This wasn't a man clinging to primitive tools. Ötzi walked the mountains equipped with gear that reflected thousands of years of human progress. His copper axe, for example, was more than just a blade. It was proof of metallurgical expertise. Smelting copper required the ability to create and sustain temperatures above 1,000 degrees C using nothing but charcoal and bellows. That's no small feat for a Neolithic society. The axe head itself was 99.7% pure copper and attached to a yew wood handle fixed in place with birch tar and leather bindings, basically a Copper Age epoxy. This wasn't a makeshift tool. It was a statement of craftsmanship, ownership, and possibly even authority. In some ancient societies, only elites or leaders carried metal tools. Was Ötzi one of them? Then there's his bow-making kit. Although the bow he carried was unfinished, he had the raw materials. A 1.8-meter yew stave, partially shaped and carefully smoothed, and a quiver of arrows, 2 fully fletched and tipped with flint heads, the others in varying stages of construction. The fact that he carried incomplete arrows tells us something crucial. Ötzi made his own tools. He didn't just use gear. He crafted it, tended to it, and likely relied on it every day. Even his fire-starting kit speaks volumes. He carried birch bark canisters filled with embers, wrapped in maple leaves, no less, to preserve heat for hours or even days. Imagine the knowledge required to make that work, understanding combustion, airflow, moisture, and insulation. For someone surviving in unpredictable mountain climates, fire wasn't a luxury. It was life or death. And Ötzi had it figured out. He also wore multi-layered clothing that would impress even modern hikers. Goat and sheep hide provided warmth, while carefully stitched seams allowed for mobility. His shoes were insulated with dry grass, essentially a prehistoric version of thermal padding, and their construction shows advanced design, different materials for different parts of the foot, deerskin for flexibility, bearskin for durability. We often think of prehistoric people as primitive, but Ötzi's outfit was arguably custom designed for alpine survival. And then there's his medicine kit, a detail many overlook. Tied to his gear were strips of birch polypore fungus, known today to have antibacterial properties. Modern tests show this fungus is effective against intestinal parasites, which Ötzi happened to have. Coincidence? Unlikely. This suggests he understood the healing properties of his environment and actively treated his ailments with what the land provided. But even with this sophisticated survival gear, Ötzi still died on the mountain. And that contrast is what makes his story so deeply human. Here was a man who had the tools, knowledge, and experience to endure. But something went wrong. Whether it was a confrontation, a misstep, or simply bad luck, his strength wasn't enough. His gear, though brilliant, couldn't undo a damaged shoulder or restore his body heat. His knowledge couldn't stop the onslaught of cold once his body began to shut down. That failure, of even the best prepared individual, is what turns Ötzi's tale from an archaeological case study into a profoundly human tragedy. He died alone, likely in pain, likely confused. His hands showed signs of struggle, his body showed stress, his movements suggested urgency. And in the end, it wasn't a battle or a predator or starvation that claimed him. It was time, cold, unrelenting time. But death wasn't the end of Ötzi's journey. In many ways, it was just the beginning. The glacier that entombed him also preserved him, transforming his body into a biological archive. Because the conditions were just right, cold enough to freeze, yet stable enough not to crush or decay, his remains endured for 5,300 years. No embalming, no sarcophagus, just nature, performing the ultimate preservation. And when he was finally found, that preservation allowed scientists to unravel an entire Copper Age world, a forensic treasure trove. His skin, still tattooed. His organs, still intact. His stomach contents, still analyzable. His blood cells, yes, blood cells, visible under a microscope. These aren't just fragments. This is full-body history. We've learned how Neolithic humans treated arthritis. We've studied prehistoric pathogens. We've explored ancient craftsmanship, trade routes, social structures, all thanks to one man, frozen at the edge of time. What's even more compelling is how public fascination with Ötzi hasn't waned. People feel strangely connected to him. Why? Maybe it's the intimacy. This isn't a statue or a fossil. This is a person, one with worn fingernails, lined skin, stomach contents, and shoes. He had bad joints and made weapons. He got sick, he bled, he ate, he died. He's not some mythic figure or royal mummy. He's us, only older. And the questions we ask about him. Who shot him? What was he running from? Why did he die alone? They're questions we ask about ourselves, too. About survival, conflict, resilience, and loss. Ötzi is a mirror, one that reflects not just where we've been, but who we are. Today, over 30 years since his discovery, Ötzi's story continues to evolve, not just in labs or museum halls, but in the minds of people around the world. His body, tools, and even his genome have been studied, analyzed, scanned, and debated. But perhaps the most astonishing part of this journey is how each new discovery only deepens the mystery. We now know that the original story, Ötzi, ambushed and killed by an arrow, was too simple. The reality, revealed by cutting-edge forensic techniques and medical imaging, is far more complex. The arrow didn't hit a major artery. The skull fractures may have come from a fall, not a weapon. And the final cause of death, most likely, was hypothermia, brought on by isolation, pain, and environmental exposure. But those conclusions don't erase the tension that pulses through every detail of his final hours. The arrow wound, the hand gash, the sudden movement up the mountain, the uncompleted bow, the half-made arrows, the full stomach, the unlooted body, all of it tells us one thing. Something was happening. Something urgent. Something unresolved. Maybe Ötzi was running from an enemy, a betrayal, a punishment. Maybe he was caught in a conflict he never saw coming. Or maybe it was simply bad luck, an injury at high elevation, followed by cold winds and a long, slow night. We may never know the full story, but we know enough to understand the emotional weight of it. And that emotional weight is what keeps us coming back to him. You can walk through the South Tyrol Museum of Archaeology in Bolzano, Italy, where Ötzi's body lies under careful refrigeration, and stand inches from the glass that separates you from a man who died before the invention of writing. You can see the wrinkles in his skin, the blackened tips of his fingers, the tattoos on his spine. It's hard not to feel a jolt of recognition. He's not a symbol, he's a person. And he represents so much more than one moment frozen in time. He embodies a transition, the Copper Age, that brief but vital bridge between stone and metal when humans were redefining survival. He represents human innovation, resilience, vulnerability. And most haunting of all, he reminds us how even in the face of knowledge, nature remains supreme. Because if a man like Ötzi, experienced, equipped, resourceful, could still fall victim to cold and injury, what does that say about the rest of us? In that way, Ötzi's death becomes universal. His story isn't just prehistoric, it's timeless. It reminds us that technology alone doesn't guarantee survival, that we are still at the mercy of the mountains, the weather, the world, that even with preparation, things can go wrong, and that sometimes the body tells stories the voice never got to finish. The scientific community continues to learn from Ötzi. His DNA offers clues to ancient migration patterns. His parasites help us understand how diseases evolved. His clothing and tools have influenced reconstructions of prehistoric fashion and metallurgy. His tattoos have sparked new theories about ancient pain relief methods, early acupuncture or pressure point therapy perhaps. But beyond the science lies something even more important: empathy. Because whether you're a historian, a student, a traveler, or just someone who stumbled on this story, you can look at Ötzi and feel something stir. You can imagine his pain, his solitude, his final breath. You can imagine being alone in the cold with nothing but your wits and your will. You can imagine not making it, and that emotional connection, across 5 millennia, is the real legacy of Ötzi the Iceman. So what do we take from all this? First, that history is not fixed. It changes as we learn, as we question, as we develop new tools to look deeper. What we thought we knew in 2001 isn't what we know now, and what we know now may be reshaped again in a few years. That's the beauty of science. It evolves. Second, that mystery isn't failure. The unanswered questions around Ötzi aren't gaps, they're invitations. Invitations to explore, to wonder, to seek. Not knowing the full truth doesn't lessen his impact. It enhances it. And third, that our ancestors were not so different from us. They felt pain. They made mistakes. They fought, built, fled, survived. They tried to control their fate, and sometimes they lost. Just like us. If Ötzi's life teaches us anything, it's that the past is alive, not because we preserve it in museums, but because it continues to speak, in the scars on a hand, in the tool shaped by fire, in the thread stitched through a leather coat, in the stomach lined with ibex meat, in the bone crushed by a fall, in the skin inked with pain, and in the silence of a body curled in ice. That's where he lives. Not just in the Alps, but in all of us. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the life and death of Ötzi the Iceman. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with others who love history, archaeology, and unraveling the mysteries of the ancient world. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring the past to understand the future.